Hi guys, welcome to Piano Rogues. I'm Ari.
And I'm Alaire.
For those who are new to meeting us, welcome. We do silly piano-related things.
We're here to make you laugh and listen to piano music and stuff.
Bringing piano fun to a YouTube near you.
We are a couple of friends who've known each other for way too long who decided to do this crazy thing where we try to make piano fun and silly for everyone.
Today we are talking about Beethoven's Ninth.
His Ninth Symphony is arguably one of the greatest pieces of classical music ever written.
Sure.
And furthermore, it was the first symphony to use voices in it. This is kind of a big deal, guys.
He was innovative.
Yes.
And he waited until the end of the symphony to add them in.
Yeah, which makes it even more shocking. Well,
what's hilarious is the chorus at the time sat in front of the symphony. So what's funny about this is the chorus at the time sat in front of the symphony. So you just had that big group of people sitting there staring at you while
can you imagine
behind for 4 movements?
Just people just sitting there staring. You know, maybe. Just waiting for their turn, and then all of a sudden they start singing.
It starts with 1.
Right, that's right. They have the solos first.
Mm-hmm. It was the longest symphony for the time, and the 4th movement was as long as
his entire 8th symphony.
Get a butt cushion.
Yeah, you're going to be sitting there for a while, but it's worth it. The most famous part of this symphony is the 4th movement, which adds in the chorus. That is the final movement of the symphony.
And it is known as the Ode to Joy.
Mm-hmm. And the lyrics from the vocal parts are taken almost entirely from a poem by Friedrich Schiller.
First written in 1785, it was revised later, I don't remember the date. And he had this poem in mind throughout most of his life. There are lines of it written on the sides of sketches for different pieces throughout his life, and I believe the entire poem was written in his diary.
Wow, like he just wrote it out word for word.
Mm-hmm. It was first performed in Vienna, May 7th, 1824. This was nearing the end of Beethoven's life. This was culmination of his life's work.
And unfortunately, he was completely deaf by this time. So although he got to see his piece premiered, he didn't actually get to hear it.
So a little bit about Beethoven.
Mm-hmm.
He enjoyed walking in nature and would frequently compose his pieces whilst walking.
Mm-hmm.
And that involved lots of gesticulating wildly.
We talk a little bit more about that in previous episodes in the series.
His doctors also had him take trips frequently to the countryside to try to help with his health. So he really enjoyed nature, and I think there's a few pieces of his that were inspired by bird songs and other such things from nature.
Well, he does have a symphony known as the Pastoral Symphony.
The piece was kind of brewing in his head through his whole life. Not that he was working on it, just pieces that he played with eventually came together in this piece at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So we can kind of see on notes on the back of the 6th symphony, he had notes for the 9th because he originally wanted to have a religious voice at the end of the 6th, but he scrapped that idea, and I think maybe he picked it up again for the 9th, and that would be why the notes were on the back of the 6th.
The 9th symphony actually began as a purely instrumental composition, and he was kind of toying with the idea of having a 10th symphony that would incorporate voices throughout.
Not sure why he changed his mind and smashed them together. Maybe because he felt like he was
felt
running out of time.
Yeah, or maybe he just thought it would have more impact to suddenly have those voices enter.
At the
end. It sure does have impact. It's kind of an amazing moment when that solo comes in.
He originally had a fully instrumental 4th movement, but he took that and used it to make the 15th quartet, and so he had room for the choral version of his fourth movement.
Interestingly, his 1808 choral fantasy had similar vocals.
If you heard it out of context and didn't know Beethoven very well, you would think it was just another part of Ode to Joy that you just hadn't heard.
The Hammerklavier Sonata has some interesting similarities to the final movement of the Ninth Symphony. The introduction has 3 pauses. Beethoven actually incorporated pauses in his introduction to the fourth movement of the Ninth Symphony.
So yeah, just little things that he tested out elsewhere that he ended up liking and using.
Yep.
So let's talk about the premiere. A little bit of history about what was going on at the time. There was a widespread belief that Beethoven had lost his ability to compose because he was deaf, and his stuff was so complicated that the general public just didn't really understand it.
Misunderstood genius.
His patrons and friends still did, though. The people
Yeah.
who understood music still appreciated
Yeah,
Beethoven.
he still had a following.
Just the
but-
general public did not understand.
Yeah. He was incorporating more ideas influenced by composers like Bach and Haydn. Bach's music was pretty much entirely polyphonic, so Beethoven's music was becoming very complex, despite the fact that he was entirely deaf by this point.
A lot of the works in his late life were considered his most difficult pieces.
Astounding.
His music had fallen out of favor, and in his place, the Italian composer.
Gioacchino Rossini had become more popular.
Originally, Beethoven was not going to premiere the Ninth in Vienna. It was commissioned by the London Philharmonic Society. Obviously, they would have wanted it to premiere there, but his health kind of made that impossible. He couldn't travel to London. Then Beethoven thought about having it in Berlin because he did not like that the public liked Rossini better than him.
The public did not understand him in
was
Vienna.
Misunderstood.
So he was going to have his premiere in Berlin instead.
Pout. Pout, pout. But his friends decided to intervene. Let's set the stage. Beethoven was invited to dinner with his friends, and at that dinner they presented him with a petition. This is excerpts from a letter that was presented to Beethoven, signed by a couple dozen people. You get to read from the petition.
A small group of disciples and lovers of the arts steps forward today from the large circle of respectful admirers surrounding your genius in its second native city to express desires long cherished, to give modest voice to requests long restrained. Withhold no longer from the public.
Stroke ego. Stroke ego.
Deny no longer to the suffering sense of greatness the performance on the latest masterpieces from your hand.
Don't deny us anymore. We want all your masterpieces.
We know that in the garden of your glorious and unexcelled symphonies, that new blossom glows. Yes, they're basically
Butt kissing.
I mean, they know he's been working on something,
Yeah.
and they love his music. Disappoint our expectations no longer. Should we tell you with what deep regret your seclusion has long been felt?
So they miss him.
Yeah, they miss him. They want him to come back, and they want to hear more music.
I mean, who could say no to that?
Yeah. I mean, that's hard to say no to right there.
That night, the theater was packed and people were excited.
It was his first symphony in 12 years.
So, important thing to know at the time, the symphonies were not practiced to the detail that they are today. They maybe had 1 or 2 practices before they played the symphony. And this was an extremely difficult piece, and many of them thought they couldn't do it in the time allotted. Probably was not what you hear today.
Yeah, it was probably not anything near as polished as what you would hear in a performance done today.
As we have stated previously, Beethoven was completely deaf, but he still wanted to conduct for his premiere of his symphony.
Beethoven wanted to conduct this performance alone, but he was convinced to share the stage with the theater's Kapellmeister. This conductor had seen about a year ago. He tried to conduct a rehearsal of Fidelio and it did not go well. The violinist Joseph Bohm said, Beethoven himself conducted. That is, he stood in front of a conductor's stand and threw himself back and forth like a madman. At one moment he stretched to his full height. At the next he crouched down to the floor. He flailed about with his hands and feet as though he wanted to play all the instruments and sing all the chorus parts. The actual direction was in Louise Duport's hands. We musicians followed his baton only. It was probably lies. Good plan. So Beethoven was so focused on his conducting that he actually didn't realize that the musicians had stopped playing because the piece was over.
And he couldn't hear that the piece was
couldn't
over.
hear that the music was over. So one of the performers, we actually have different sources that claim different people, actually came up and turned him around so that he could see everyone applauding for him.
And they had been applauding vigorously before, but when she turned him around, they were confronted even more so with the fact that he was definitely deaf. So they gave him a standing ovation and were very exuberant.
Aww.
Apparently he didn't react.
He didn't react?
No. And that feeds into our wonders about Beethoven being possibly autistic.
If you're interested in learning a little bit more about that,
You should check out our collaborative partners channel, Yosemite Sam. She is doing an episode about that topic.
early critics rejected the finale as cryptic and eccentric, the product of a deaf and aging composer. So from a newspaper, the public received the musical hero with the utmost respect and sympathy, listened to his wonderful, gigantic creations with the most absorbed attention, and broke out in jubilant applause, often during sections and repeatedly at the end of them.
So let's talk about the meaning behind the Ninth Symphony. This is post-war, after Napoleon's defeat.
At the time that Beethoven composed the Ninth Symphony, you could be jailed for even speaking the word freedom.
They were worried about a re-uptick in revolutionary ideas. Maybe his Ode to Joy is meant to be an ode to freedom. When Napoleon was first coming into power, he was fighting for the rights of all men and individualism. And Beethoven wrote the Heroica for Bonaparte. It was subtitled or titled Bonaparte. But when he found out that Napoleon had declared himself emperor,
There's a famous story about him ripping up the title page.
and renaming it to
The Eroica Symphony.
In Memory of a Great Man,
Oof.
and added a funeral march. Let's talk about the poem itself. So this first section,
As we mentioned earlier, most of these lyrics are taken from the revised Ode to Joy poem written by Friedrich Schiller. However, at the beginning of the choral portion of the fourth movement, there is a baritone solo with lyrics that Beethoven wrote himself, and they read, translated from German, "O friends, not these sounds. Let us instead strike up more pleasing and more joyful ones."
so not the sounds of the symphony, but the sounds of voices.
Oh, it gives me chills. Like literally chills. After the baritone solo, the poem from the original poet begins. Let me just read maybe the first stanza or so of that. Joy, 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 beautiful spark of divinity. Daughter from Elysium, we enter, burning with fervor, heavenly being, your sanctuary. Your magic brings together what custom has sternly divided. All men shall become brothers, wherever your gentle wings hover. Whoever has been lucky enough to become a friend to a friend, whoever has found a beloved wife, let him join our songs of praise. I think this poem is beautiful. It's a celebration of the joys of being human.
So it's a little surprising that Beethoven got away with the lyrics in this poem.
Yeah, it is.
Apparently, Beethoven was actually being surveyed. That's a recent thing they found out from the police
Really?
because of his ideals.
Wow.
So Beethoven's Ninth Symphony has echoed through time. It has been used at the bringing down of the Berlin Wall.
They use it every New Year in Japan.
It has stood for freedom and peace throughout history.
And now, without further ado, we are pleased to present to you
The Piano Rogues arrangement
of excerpts from Liszt's transcription of the symphonic work for solo piano. I have taken out a few choice pieces. We're not going to do the whole symphony. Remember, the fourth movement is as long as the eighth symphony all by itself. So we're just doing a little tiny bit of it. So I've taken a few select pieces and incorporated guitar to create a duet between piano and guitar. A collaboration between Piano Rogues
and Yosemite Sam.
Enjoy. everyone who came from Sam's channel to check us out.
We really appreciate you being here. Please
like and subscribe to our YouTube.
So if you guys are interested in more information on Beethoven, we have a series. We will leave a link in the description box below.
Thanks for letting us steal your screens for a while. Stay rogue.